The sun was sinking low behind the desert hills when the lonely cowboy rode into the town of Dry Creek, his horse dragging dust with every weary step and the creak of saddle leather echoing in the silence that hung heavy over the main street. He had been riding for days, his supplies gone thin, his throat dry, and his spirit held together only by the stubborn grit of a man who had long ago chosen the road over the hearth. The town was small, just a crooked line of buildings, saloon with its swinging doors, mercantile with its peeling sign, livery stable, sheriff's office that looked more like a shack than a place of law, and a scattering of homes that leaned against the desert wind like tired old men. He had no plans beyond restocking his food, getting some tobacco, maybe a drink if his coins stretched that far. He wasn't looking for trouble, nor for company. But fate has a way of planting things in a man's path when he least expects them, and on that dry and dusty evening the cowboy's life would take a turn he had never seen coming. As he dismounted, tying his horse to the post outside the mercantile, he noticed the stares. Folks in Dry Creek were the sort who measured every stranger like a gambler measures his hand. Some nodded faintly, others turned away, but most just watched with the guarded eyes of people who had seen too many. Drifters pass through and stir up dust that never settled. He ignored them, pushing open the mercantile door, the bell above it giving a tired jingle. The air inside smelled of flour, coffee, and old wood. He picked up what he needed: beans, salt pork, a roll of tobacco, and laid his coins down on the counter. The shopkeeper, a plump man with spectacles, counted slowly and, though polite, gave the cowboy the same cautious look as the rest. Business done, the cowboy stepped back outside, and that was when he saw her. She was sitting on the edge of the boardwalk just beyond the store, her back against the wall, her hands folded in her lap. At first he thought she might be some kind of apparition, for she wore what was unmistakably a wedding dress, though the fabric was torn, stained with dust, and hung loosely on her thin frame. The veil was missing, her hair tangled, and her eyes hollow with hunger. Beside her lay a pair of discarded shoes, too worn to walk in, and on her lap rested nothing but emptiness. She looked up as the cowboy stepped out, her lips cracked, her voice no more than a whisper. "Bread," she said. Just one word, not a greeting, not a story, not even a plea for coins. Just bread. The cowboy stopped in his tracks, the sack of supplies heavy in his hand. He had seen beggars before, men down on their luck, women abandoned by the trail, children who had lost everything. But never had he seen a bride, a starving bride in a torn dress, begging outside a store filled with food that no one cared to share. He looked around, waiting for someone else to move, to step forward to offer her help. But the townsfolk passed by with quickened steps, averting their gaze, as if her presence was some shameful reminder of their own cowardice. The cowboy knelt down beside her, studying her face. She was young, barely out of girlhood, yet the hardness of despair already etched lines where joy should have lived. "How long since you ate?" he asked. Her lips trembled, but no words came. She only looked at the sack in his hand. Without thinking further, he reached inside, pulled out a loaf of bread he had just purchased, and placed it gently in her lap. She clutched it like it was treasure, tore into it with a desperation that spoke louder than words, and as she ate, tears rolled down her cheeks. The cowboy sat back on his heels, letting her eat, letting the world around them pass by in judgment or indifference. When at last she slowed, cradling the half-eaten loaf like a child, she looked up at him, gratitude shining faintly through the haze of suffering. "Thank you," she whispered. "No one else would." The cowboy tipped his hat, though his mind was turning. "You've got a story," he said, "and I reckon it's one worth telling. If you'll trust me enough to share it, I'll listen." She hesitated, glancing down the street, where a pair of rough-looking men leaned against the saloon railing, watching her with sneers that sent a chill through the cowboy's blood. She drew the bread closer, as if hiding it from their eyes, and said softly, "Not here. Not in the open." The cowboy nodded, stood, and offered her his hand. "Come on, we'll sit in the shade of the livery. No one will bother us there." They walked slowly, her steps weak, her dress dragging in the dirt. The cowboy's hand was steady at her elbow, guiding her past the curious glances and murmurs of townsfolk who pretended not to notice. At the livery they sat on an upturned crate in the cool shadow, the smell of hay and horses thick in the air. For a while she was silent, chewing small bites of bread, gathering the courage that only comes when a soul begins to believe it might not be entirely alone. Then at last she spoke. "My name is Clara," she said. "I was meant to be married 3 weeks ago." The dress was new then, white as snow. My groom, his name was Thomas, he left me standing at the altar. Walked out with no word, no explanation. My family turned their backs on me, said I had brought shame. I had nothing, no home, no friends who would stand by me. I wandered here, thinking maybe I could find work. But the men in this town look at me like I'm something else, and the women look